There's a system that makes things stick so that when you need it in your class or at work or on the exam, it is going to be right there for you. And this doesn't require endless cramming, rereading, and highlighting of your textbook. It's a very simple method that has helped the students that I've worked with score higher results with less time studying over and over again. Because they understand that studying longer doesn't mean that you will remember things, but studying smarter does. At The Study Coach, we help students and working professionals with science-backed learning methods, and our students use this system to prepare for exams. After using this exact method, they scored higher with less time studying, as you can see with the results here. Whether you're in medicine, engineering, or business, this method works across all different subjects because it is basically built on how the brain actually learns. So we will start with the 2 stages of reading. Stage number 1 is the consumption stage, where you take in information. Stage number 2 is the digestion phase, which is where you process the information. Most people only consume. They only do stage 1, which is reading the textbook. And they highlight, they reread, and they binge their lectures. But they skip the most important part, the digesting. And that's why they start forgetting information. The fix is a system that we call Pacer, and it basically sorts information into 5 different boxes. And each type has a specific method to make the information stick. Pacer stands for practical, how to do it. A, an analogy, like something that you might already know. The C stands for conceptual, what and why and how things are connected. The E stands for evidence, so can you provide additional examples and proof? The R stands for reference, and that focuses on the tiny details. So let's break each one down such that you have an idea of each method and how to implement it. The P stands for practical, basically how to do it. Practical information tells you the steps of how to do something. So for example, a recipe in a book for baking a cake, instructions for riding a bike, or steps for solving a math equation, since we're talking about studies here. The only way to really learn this is to practice it. You can read 100 pages about riding a bike, but the moment you actually get on the bike, you will learn way faster in 5 minutes than you did in the 5 hours of reading that information. When you find practical or procedural information, don't just copy notes. Do it as soon as you can. So if you're learning about cooking, then make sure that you cook. If you're learning about coding, then make sure that you type or write the code. And if you're learning a math formula, then solve the problems with it. And if you don't have time to practice right now, then don't waste more time reading it. Come back when you do have the time to start implementing the information. The A stands for analogy, like something you already know. Analogy information is when new knowledge reminds us of something that we already understand. An example here is that the heart works like a pump, only in our body it pushes blood through our veins. A computer memory is like a backpack. You can only carry so much, so you need to pack it carefully and take out information and put in new information, what is most useful for you at the moment. And a fraction is like sharing pizza slices. You cut the pizza into 8 pieces and you eat 2, and that's 2 out of 8. And this works because your brain remembers way better when it connects new ideas to old ones or things that are already familiar to you. Here's the key. You need to check and double check the analogy. So ask yourself, how are they the same? And how are they different? Or can I make it even better? So for example, if we say the heart is like a pump, that's true because both push liquid through tubes, but there's also a difference because a normal pump doesn't have its own rhythm and the heart does have a rhythm. So maybe a better analogy is that the heart is like a self-charging pump that never stops running. Unless you die, then it stops running. By making and fixing analogies, you actually think harder about the information, and that deeper thinking helps you make the information stick. Remember that when you're making analogies, you are trying to make comparisons with things that you already know. The C stands for conceptual information, and you're going to ask yourself what and why and how is it connected, because conceptual information explains ideas, facts, and connections. So the example here is the idea of gravity, the principle of supply and demand, or the structure of a cell. This type of knowledge is usually about understanding the bigger picture. And the best way to learn concepts is to make a mind map. So you start with the big idea in the middle, for example, the ecosystem, and you might branch out to plants, animals, energy flows, and decomposers. And then you start to connect them. So the plants, they use sunlight, and animals eat the plants, and eventually decomposers recycle waste. So the map doesn't need to look pretty and images and perfect arrows and highlights. The point is to see how everything is connected. And this works because your brain doesn't store knowledge in linear lines, in a straight line like a book. It stores information as a web of connections. So by drawing this map, you can copy that web. So remember, conceptual information is equal to making mind maps. The E stands for evidence, examples, and proof. Evidence information is the supporting details. For example, World War I started in 1914. 70% of students forget information after one day without reviewing, and a case study shows that exercise helps with memory. This type of information makes concepts stronger and more believable. So the best way to handle evidence is to store it and rehearse it later. This means that you write it down in your notes, you either add it to your mind maps, the conceptual step, or you put it in a flashcard app like Anki. And the most important thing is when you practice, for example, instead of memorizing 1914 by itself, you ask yourself, why was 1914 so important? Or how does that date explain the start of the war? That way, the evidence sticks because it's linked to the bigger idea, and you create more of a story around it. Again, evidence-based means that you store and rehearse later, and you repeat it on increasing intervals. The R stands for referencing, meaning the tiny details. A reference information is the small exact facts. And examples are here: the number pi is always 3.14159. The water formula is always H2O. And the capital of France is still Paris. So you don't need to deep understand any of this information. You just need to recall the facts really quickly. So the best way to handle this is to reference this information into flashcards and then apply also spaced repetition. Flashcards ask you questions and you recall the answer, and over time the app, the Anki app or the Quizlet app, spaces out the reviews such that you don't forget the information. And this way you're not wasting hours on rereading specific lists. Instead, you review for a few minutes every day, and then you start to remember the information over long term. The most important thing is here that we balance stuff. Here's the big picture. Every time that you consume information, you need to also digest it. And if you only read, you will forget. And if you map and you practice and you compare and you rehearse, you will start to remember a lot better. Think of it like food. If you keep eating but you never digest, you will start to feel sick. And with learning, that sickness is reflected into forgetting. I'll give you an example here. Let's say you're learning how to drive a car. Amazing moment. From a conceptual point of view, you can make a map of the big ideas, how the engine and the gear work together, how they influence the wheels, and how it brings the car into motion. You don't need every detail yet, you just need to know how the main parts are connected. If you want to compare it to something you already know, driving is like driving or riding a bike. You need balance on the bike or control in the car, and you have to keep your eyes on the road, otherwise you'll crash. Small movements change the direction, and here's the difference then: a car has way more controls than a bike, so that might make it a bit more complex. Regarding evidence, you want to store one fact. For example, it usually takes new drivers about 40 to 50 hours of practice before they pass a driving test. Now, that detail makes the concept more realistic. When we talk about reference, you might need to do a theory test for your driver's license. You can put the speed limits of your area on a flashcard for quick recall. For example, city streets always 50 kilometers an hour. And regarding procedural, actually practicing the driving, you adjust the mirrors, you press the pedals, and you shift the gears, because no amount of reading how to drive a car will teach you as much as you actually driving the car and doing it. You've covered all of the 5 PACER steps with one topic, and this is exactly how our students study. They tag each piece of information as P, A, C, E, or R, and then they use the matching methods that we explained today. And that's why they remember more in less time. They walk into exams way more confident, and they perform a lot better without cramming last minute. Now that you know how to remember anything you read, you also want to retain that knowledge for the long term. I've created a video on how to remember for the long term based on 5 Japanese inspired study hacks. Go check it out here, and I will see you in the next one.